Okay, so my project is on indigenous food systems. So let's talk about how we make food now. Um, well, obviously, food comes from the land, whether it be animals, crops, fungus, any food you can think of. Um, there's a delicate and intricate ecological system to growing food sustainably. The native populations that once lived in North America and still do were champions of the food system. They keep the land healthy and they took from it responsibly, always making sure to preserve the delicate balance of nature with the utmost respect. So, industrial farming is a huge problem. Um, Clarissa Diaz from the World Economic Forum talks about how the globe's current food base is based on a few cash crops like wheat, rice, soy, and corn. These large monocultures deplete the soil of nutrients. Pesticides used in these farming methods, they poison the soil, they get in the waterways, they cause a whole slew of ecological problems. Eating things like strawberries and oranges all year round requires transporting them long distances across the planet and making huge carbon footprints. I've seen like Dole fruit cups grown in Argentina, shipped in Thailand, and sold in Ohio. So eating fruits out of season like that is a big problem. But there is a way to solve these problems, this problem of factory farming and industrialization, and that's indigenous food systems. Valerie Bluebird Jernigan, a professor of rural health at the State University of Oklahoma, talks about indigenous food sovereignty, or the right and responsibility of indigenous people to produce healthy and culturally appropriate foods through traditional indigenous food systems. So, for example, here in North America, it would be traditional native North American foods, squash, beans, corn, and many, many other plants that were utilized by Native Americans. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, the characteristics of indigenous food systems are an intense understanding of nature and its cycles, a combining of food generation with food production. Food generation is kind of like the act of producing food. So, for example, the ocean containing fish is food generation, but the act of fishing is food production. Also, going distances to gather food, then preparing it and consuming it in the same place. This goes back to like the fruit cups. You know, what's the point of growing something in South America, packing it in Asia, and selling it in North America? Also, the generation of food through territorial management and the importance of spirituality. Native Americans respected the land because, you know, it was their belief that everything was living and everything had a spirit, and they had deep respect for the land and its processes. So, some solutions to the factory farming problem. It's local everything. Indigenous food systems are the key to taking down factory farming and to restore balance to the food systems. Like I said before, indigenous people in the U.S. consider food a sacred gift from the land. Healthy and bountiful produce is received when we care for the land. Eating in season, like I said before, is one way. When foods are seasonal instead of shipped across the world, the environment benefits greatly. Farmers markets and local farmers are also an important role. Accessibility and availability of these foods is vital. Many people, not even Native Americans, are poor and they can't get food, like we talked about the food desert in Jamestown. And perhaps most importantly, restoring the tribal knowledge of these Native Americans, planting native foods, helping the indigenous populations out of the poverty and oppression that, white European colonialists subjected them to. And finally, we have some challenges to these goals. Sarah Usha Melasherevu from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities states that federal policies, which promoted settler colonialism, land theft, and forced removal of native nations, disrupted the indigenous food systems. There were nearly 400 treaties signed between 1778 and 1871. They detailed hunting and fishing rights for natives on ceded land, promises not to interfere with natives, and promises that the natives would be able to keep their land. Most of these, if not all of them, were broken. Traditional tribal knowledge was lost in the depraved residential school system, where native children were it was a forced assimilation. They had to cut their hair, they couldn't speak their language, and many, many, many native children died, and their culture was destroyed. All of these factors contribute to the high poverty and food insecurity levels amongst native communities, especially. American Indians and Alaska Native adults are 50% more likely to be obese and 30% more likely to suffer from hypertension compared to white Americans. They're also 50% more likely to be diagnosed with coronary heart disease and 3 times more likely to have diabetes. All in all, the modern way of producing, distributing, and consuming food is deeply flawed. Industry and factory farming have turned food into a commodity used to make companies and executives rich and then even richer, and the planet sick and polluted. We now look to the Native Americans who are unjustly forced off their land and separated from their culture and identity. Their tribal knowledge and deep respect for the land is the answer to reviving a healthy food system. We cannot change the past, but we can change the future, and we must work together.